Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. We're so happy to have you with us today. My name is Liz Owen. I'm the Director of Communications at PFLAG National, coming to you live from lovely Burbank, California. And we've got folks joining us live on Facebook and on YouTube, and we'll be sharing your comments and questions later on in the broadcast. Right now, I'm really happy to introduce, also from the staff of PFLAG National, my friend and colleague, Jean Marie Navetta, who is our Director of Learning and Inclusion. Hello, Jean Marie.
Hey, Liz. Hello from Palm Springs, California, waving towards the west at you. And hello, everybody, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. This is our second week of doing this. Last week was an experiment. No one got fired, so we decided we'd try it again and see what happens. And a million HR people just went into a panic. I want to introduce my two colleagues who are joining us today. My first one is my colleague and my other half at work on the Learning and Inclusion team, Jamie Heinkel. So she is joining us from Portland, Oregon. She'll do a quick introduction. And I am also happy to introduce Jamel Dooley, who is joining us from Washington, D.C. from our chapter engagement team. So Jamie and Jamel want to give a very, very quick introduction and background on who you are.
I can go first. I'm Jamie Heinkel, sometimes just referred to as Heinkel because we have two Jamies on our very small staff. I use the pronouns she and her. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I have been with PFLAG for 12 years in various roles.
Great. Jamel?
Hi, I'm Jamel. I am the Chapter Services Coordinator here at PFLAG National, responsible for starting new chapters, making sure folks are doing what they need to do to state chapters. I'm here in Washington, D.C., pronouns he, him, his, and I'm going on my second year here at PFLAG. I started September of 2018.
2 years? It feels like we've been together way, way longer than that. I mean, in a really good way, not in a it's been forever kind of way. So today we are discussing an article by the author Jacob Sarkisian that was in The Insider. And the title of the article was The 14 Best Movies Featuring LGBTQ Stories That You Can Watch on Netflix Right Now. So when we picked this article, we found it really interesting because of both what was there and what wasn't there. And what we saw was what wasn't there gave us a great opportunity to have a really exciting conversation, and a conversation that, frankly, I think we're going to have a lot of fun with. And it'll give us an opportunity to do some great education. So for those of you who are following along with us, if you go to our web link, which is on social media for this, you can download the link to the article as well as the questions that we are going to do. If you are a member of a workplace ERG, you can host this conversation in your workplace. If you're a PFLAG chapter member, this is a great chapter activity. And if you're just in quarantine like the rest of us, it might be a great way to start a conversation about something else that other than what is for dinner or what day of the week it is. So the article gives 14 suggestions and kind of an introduction, and I want to get right into the questions. So our first question for this discussion had to do with this. So it asks, first of all, how many of the films on this list of 14 have you seen? That's part one. And what other stuff would you suggest that is currently available on Netflix that you'd recommend to friends and family? So Jamel, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So going through the list, I had seen 4 out of the 14. When I went through the list, though, I was kind of disappointed. I feel like there was an opportunity to show off some heavy hitters, some really quintessential, films that feature, queer and LGBT folks. Some that came to my mind immediately, for those that love Pose, Paris is Burning. There are so many things in mainstream culture that reference Paris is Burning. I was really surprised that wasn't there. Tu Wong Fu, Wesley Snipes, Patrick Swayze, another big film of its time. Hurricane Bianca, for those that are in love with Drag Race. Bianca Del Rio, the winner of season 6, went on to produce 2 movies, Hurricane Bianca 1 and 2. But even more informational films, The Death of Marsha P. Johnson, Milk. There were so many other things that I thought would have shown up on the list that didn't. So I was definitely surprised that those did not pop up.
But you found some other ones. We all bonded over to Wong Fu.
Yeah.
Michelle was Amo, and it was amazing. So that is a start. So, I mean, there was stuff that was missing, and the number of films was pretty low. Heinkel, what do you got for us?
So I also have only seen 4 of the films that were on the list out of 14. And as I was thinking about that, and as I was sort of pondering why that might be the case, I realized that for me personally, I much prefer stories with LGBTQ characters where the fact that they are LGBTQ identified is not the whole story, it is just a part of a bigger story. And I felt like that list focused on those stories where being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and or queer was like the focus of the film. So that was something that really struck me as I was thinking about, like, that's not even half, Heinkel, that's crazy. And one of the series that on Netflix right now that has really stood out to me over the past couple of months, year or so, was the new season, or the extension of the stories of Tales of the City. And the new season features Ellen Page, and I just found it to be a really complete representation of a lot of the conversations that I am having in my life right now, a lot of the conversations that are popping up in workplaces that we work with through Straight for Equality, conversations that I'm having with my friends about pronouns and about sort of why that conversation is really taking hold. And it really has been a standout to me. And the other thing that I think is really neat about the new season is that it has created a place for the older seasons as well, the adaptations that were done on PBS back in the day, and the novels as they were coming out. It's a way that I've connected with my mother, who read the original series as it was being released. And so it's also a neat tie to history.
Yeah, and when we were having this conversation, for everybody who's joining us online, we were doing a little prep this morning to sort of get to what we were going to talk about. And when Jamie mentioned Tales of the City, we all got really excited and kind of were a little surprised that it wasn't there. And Jamie made a great point that it gives an opportunity to go into other stuff. So if you've never read the books, you definitely should get Armistead Maupin's book. You have all the time in the world to read now, and today's a great time to start. But also to watch the original series, which was done by PBS. And I was actually kind of sort of somewhere between where Jamel and Jamie actually were. When I looked at this list, I was definitely surprised. I had seen 6 of the 14, and I always considered myself really good at LGBT culture, and was sort of surprised at what I didn't see. The interesting things are that the ones that I didn't see, I also recognized were stories that don't particularly always resonate with me. And I thought, well, this should be a reason for me to actually go in and watch some of these stories. In most cases, it was stories that I felt like I've heard before, and I want different stories now, but it's still probably worth seeing them. But Jamie made a point that is really important to me. So I certainly love my films that are created by queer creators and that are featuring actors from the community and our allies who are telling these stories. But for me, one of the really important things is seeing, and I think a barometer of how far we're getting is, do we see ourselves in places other than the LGBTQ films? And where do we pop up in other places? And, because for many years, I'm old enough to remember a time when there were sort of this set of films that were just for people like us who are LGBTQ. And that is where we appeared. And any place else that we appeared, the stories weren't particularly positive or well done. And so it excites me to look at Netflix and to see so many things that have become really, really popular that feature these LGBTQ characters, where their stories aren't necessarily about being LGBTQ, but for whom those became sort of themes. So Jamie and I are both Doctor Who fans. So when we pay attention to a character like Captain Jack, who was pansexual before anyone was using the word, and it was very much an element of his character, or when we watch Sense8 and we see the way a lot of those stories, particularly about trans individuals, were integrated in. And it gave insight into experiences, and yet it wasn't solely about that. And it shows people as we are, because we exist sort of in these universes where there are other people. It's not just our story. So I thought that was kind of an interesting way to look at it. So we sort of talked about what was there and what wasn't there. But the next question that I want to ask is sort of about the themes of the film. So if you looked at a lot of these films, there were certainly several of them that had more positive endings or more positive stories, but a lot of them were kind of melancholy and kind of tragic, and a lot of bodies along the way. And there's legit reasons for those stories to be told. So the question that we have queued up is, many of these films have melancholy or tragic endings. In your opinion, first. Why is that the case? How does it make you feel? And what do you think members of the LGBTQ and ally community can do to uplift some of these films that have queer characters that have happy endings or powerful endings or empowering endings? And I don't know which one of you want to take that first, but somebody jump in and let's get into this one, because I think this is a great question.
Well, and I can kick us off. I think that one of the things that really strikes me is that we are, and I'm very grateful for this, moving towards stories with more and more happy endings. But there was a time when we were talking about LGBTQ history and LGBTQ culture in this country where part of the reason tragic stories were being told is because mainstream audiences didn't know that tragedy existed. It was being sort of swept under the rug. It wasn't national news. If it was, it wasn't in a particularly positive light. And so films like Philadelphia, which are on the list, which was on the list, that story needed to be told because most people didn't have access to it and weren't hearing it. And so I think that is important for us to recognize, but I'm just so grateful that we are getting to a place now where we can see those stories that have happy endings. We can see Nomi and Amanita get married at the end of Sense8. Like, I'm glad that we are getting to that place while recognizing that still sometimes the stories that are being told can feel somewhat tragic, but I'm glad we're getting to those happy endings.
Jamil, what do you think?
Absolutely. I completely agree. I think we're now entering an epic time period where LGBT queer folks are able to tell their own stories. And within that, they're able to to tap other people that can help amplify those voices and really get into the nitty-gritty of what it's like to be LGBTQ in a variety of facets, right? As it pertains to the second half of your questions, though, what we can do to uplift, the queer media. Number one, I always tell people, do your Googles. I think it's really important to access multiple streams of information, but I think Google is a really good starting place to find queer media. Once you find those streams of media or, individual films, television shows, musical artists, etc., use your voice to amplify them. Go to your communities, talk about it. We're also seeing a ton of crowdfunding. There's a GoFundMe, Facebook fundraising for everything. I think that's another really good place to start, which ties into my last point. I think it's time for us to put our money where our mouths are and begin to actually try to fund the media that we want to see. There are so many amazing plays and movies that start on crowdfunding sources that have come into fruition. At one point, I believe Moonlight was crowdfunded in part, and we see what a sensation that was. The flip side to that is there are a lot that die there because people don't know about them. So I think a big part of this is us, actually doing the work and finding, stories and storytellers that represent our interests, amplifying them, and then coming together as a community to actually provide them with the funding and support they need to, make those realities come true.
And I think that's such an incredible point, Jamal. And I think it's such an important point because we talk about, the stories exist and they always have existed, but the funding to get them into places where people are going to see them is a completely different conversation and a completely different effort. And there are gatekeepers and there still are barriers, and we need to get people there. And particularly as we get into really marginalized spaces where we're talking about LGBTQ and people of color, people from lower socioeconomic groups with less access to some of these resources and networks that they need to move stuff forward, it really becomes incumbent upon us who are out there to pay attention to what's going on, do your Googling, and to put your money where your mouth is. I know that it is a very, very difficult time right now financially, but I mean, in better financial times, when you can give that $5 or $10, it's about funding the people who are creating the art that are telling our stories. So I think one of the other important points that I want to just sort of surface as part of this part of the conversation is a little bit of, the way that we look at some of these issues. So there is something called the kill your gays trope. If you Google it, as Jamel would suggest, you'll get a whole bunch of stuff on it. And it is people who sort of have actually tracked in mainstream media, particularly people who celebrate the fact that they've introduced LGBTQ characters. And yet every single one of those LGBTQ characters ends up dead or mauled or in some sort of tragic situation. I was a huge Game of Thrones watcher. And there was actually a running body count of the queer characters. Like, that's how much of a sort of a joke it actually became. And it's really not funny. And there are lots of other ways that we look at, how we are integrated into media. I mean, we think about the kill your gays trope. We think about things like the Bechdel task, which is from Alison Bechdel, who wrote Fun Home. And if you don't know what that is, time to Google that one too. But these tools are out there and these resources are out there. And we've had resources like Vito Russo's The Celluloid Closet that have sort of chronicled the emergence of queer people in cinema and how it's influenced the mainstream. And yet, for a lot of us, until somebody tells us, read this or look at this, we don't actually know it's there. And so I think for those of us who know this, social media, and especially as we are all trapped in our houses watching TV, this is a good time to do this. So let me get to our third question so we have a little bit of time to read off some comments and questions from people who are participating today. And I just want to say hello to everybody. It is so exciting to see people on and commenting, and it is really nice to be connected. So our third question is that our list was overwhelmingly, though not exclusively, white and gay male. So the question is, why do you think that's the case? And how can you raise this issue with people in a way that actually advances a useful conversation rather than sort of ends up in just a complaining about what is wrong? I don't know which one of you want to take this one on first, but I will throw it over to you.
Well, I'll go first. I think both of you have hit aspects of the first part of the question. Why do we think this is the case? Jean Marie, you mentioned gatekeeping, and Jamie Heinkel, you mentioned like the idea of the mainstream media. I think historically, a lot of the folks that have had access to the means of production or the ability to create these, movies have typically been cis white people and sometimes cis white gays. And so when you think about their networks, they're going to continue to put out media that are mass producible, that are going to be hit as many, check marks as they can in the mainstream media. And that's what makes money, or at least that was the what was said. We now know that may not have been true. But I really think that Hollywood and the powers that be held on to that idea and continue to just propagate it within itself. I think this is a sensitive conversation. I think it really starts with just exposure. Pick out your favorite movie, take it to your chapter meeting, show it to a friend or family member, get them excited about it. And I think if you have that conversation and get folks excited about it, they're going to want more. And then that opens a window of conversation to show other types of media.
Yeah.
I think
I just want proof that what you said is absolutely true. So as we were prepping for this, Jamel mentioned the film Strike a Pose and then told me what it was about, which was about Madonna's backup dancers during sort of the Vogue era. And I was like, I always wondered what happened to them. And he was like, there's a movie for that. So I think there are these everyday conversations that we can go into, and it gives us great opportunities. Heinkel, what comments do you have on that?
I mean, I think Jamel hit it sort of right on the nose about sort of why we think that might be the case. So I'm not going to talk about that, but I am also going to give credit to his using the Google's advice, because one of the things that I think that we can all do is use the Googles to find those stories about people who don't have the same experience as us. And as an example of this, we have another discussion series that we release every other month called Talking Inclusively, about the intersection of other diversity dimensions with LGBTQ issues. And as I was doing homework for that and looking for an article and thinking about questions, I came across a short film festival called Queer Harlem Renaissance that is going to feature a number of films about the Harlem Renaissance and the involvement of LGBTQ identified artists and actors and musicians and all sorts of other things. And if I hadn't taken the time to do that research, to do that homework, to find that story. I don't know that I ever would have come across a short film festival about the Harlem Renaissance. It's just not necessarily within my sphere at the moment. And so I think that one of the things and one of the ways that we can raise this with people and elevate these voices is by acknowledging when things are outside of our sphere and asking for those stories. LGBTQ activists of color on Twitter, finding what they're like. I think that it's all about connection and being sure that we as individuals are going beyond our sphere and encouraging others to do the same.
And I think now is a really good time to do that. I mean, we are all making jokes about how much time we have to consume media while we sit at home. I mean, this is a really good opportunity to do something good with that. And, as we have this conversation, I can't help but think of being considerably younger when I first was coming out and looking at what everybody starts laughing, like 300 years ago when I was younger. And there were films in black and white. But when that happened, there was such a limited scope of films that were available to me. I think about things like Desert Hearts and Go Fish and the incredibly true adventures of Two Girls in Love. And there were a lot of good films, but they were limited. And putting your hands on them was really difficult. Like, you really had to look for them. I would wait for PBS to do its LGBTQ film festival in June. And that's when I would watch my films, because there was no Netflix or on demand or anything like that. And it's still hard sometimes to put your hands on these things. So I think when you find availability and you find some of these things available, we should be sharing them. And because we are now hyper connected because of the way we're currently living, there's a real opportunity for that. I know that somebody actually mentioned that there's I saw in the comments, somebody said something about Tubi, which is another online streaming service, and that there's some stuff there. So we have about 9 minutes to go. And I'm going to actually ask Liz if she would come back on and talk to us a little bit about what people have been saying and any questions that we got, and have a conversation with us. Hello, Liz.
I'm literally been scribbling frantic notes with all these movies for my list, and you gave me flashbacks to 300 years ago when I was living in New York, and the movie Parting Glances came out, and I remember it being such a reflection of the culture of the time, and now I feel like I want to go find it. Maybe I can find it on Tubi.
I know.
So we had a comment here from Brian Kirk talking about the need to see more films with trans individuals in it, with trans actors playing the role. Any thoughts or comments on that to the panel?
I thought it was interesting that on this list, I think it was The Danish Girl was there, which don't get me wrong, it's a good film. Like, it's an interesting story. I read the book, I've read the history on it, but I thought I could name so many other films that I would tell people that they need to see that tell real stories, not quasi-fictionalized versions of things that are so important. I mean, the one, and I don't think it's on Netflix at this time, is Southern Comfort, which if you've never seen Southern Comfort, you need to look it up and go see it. It is a tremendous film. It gets to places that you probably have never thought of. And so I think there's a lot more that we can do in that space. And that actually is one of those great conversations that's happening, which is, how do we integrate more actually trans actors into the worlds to tell their own stories? But I want to see what Jamel and Jamie have to say.
I completely agree. I mean, I think the opportunity is there. I think it goes back to gatekeeping. Like, we have to make these studios and these people in charge hire trans people to do trans roles. At point blank period, I completely agree.
Yeah.
That was one of the best things, one of my favorite things about Transparent on Amazon. If you haven't seen it, it centered stories about trans people, by trans people, for a hired trans crew and trans creatives. And they really responded to a cultural moment when there were some behind the scenes issues, and such like the crisis of what was going on in their production sparked so much creativity for their finale. Was I thought brilliant.
It did. I agree. And Liz, I love the fact that you made a point that it wasn't just who you were seeing on screen. It was the people who were writing. It was the people who were doing the cameras. It was the people behind the scene. So we got a lot of stuff. What else do we have in the chat, Liz?
Gonna go check right now. Well, Sparky Pete wants to thank all of you Because it's so needed and so helpful. And I want to say thanks also because it is helpful and it is needed right now. I'm looking for more suggestions. Toby said just more LGBTQ movies and stories. Just all the stories, all the movies.
Now I have a question for the three of you because I think this could be particularly interesting. And I was wondering if you could share either, in your opinion, the best or your favorite camp film.
Ooh. Hard one.
Oh.
How do you pick one?
Yeah, how do you pick one? Oh. I mean, if you're going, I have to say, and we already talked about it, To Wong Fu is one of my favorites. And the reason for it isn't just that it's fabulous camp, but it explains behind the scenes. Like it sort of gives you an explanation of why this is relevant and why camp is. And if anybody's not familiar with camp, Susan Sontag's essay on camp is really interesting and will leave you asking more questions, but in a really good way. I also want to throw out Priscilla, Queen of the Desert.
Mm-hmm. I think I was watching camp before I knew what camp was. So Tu Wong Fu is one of my favorites. The Birdcage is another one. It's over the top and ridiculous. I think this one isn't necessarily queer, but I think it's revered in the queer pantheon. Death Becomes Her.
Yes.
Totally.
Favorites.
Yeah. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, again, not queer, but has a huge, it totally falls into camp. And pretty much anything by John Waters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Drew Griffin has a favorite. It doesn't fall in the camp category, but Torch Song Trilogy.
Oh my God.
Beautiful film.
I think more people of a certain age probably use that film as a jumping off point for coming out to people. It certainly was a huge piece in my coming out. My best friend will tell you that. Really, really important. And if you've never seen Torch Song Trilogy, you really should watch the film version. It's spectacular.
And Valley of the Dolls, not necessarily in the queer pantheon, but as far as camp and Mommy Dearest, those two, it's a toss-up.
Mm-hmm. Also illustrate those with me.
I'm going to throw out But I'm a Cheerleader.
Yes.
When I was a kid and I watched that film, it just seemed so ridiculous and it was so campy and it got me thinking about bigger issues in a way that I hadn't before, and that's one that stands out for me. And if I catch it on any streaming service, I'm probably going to watch it at least once before it disappears again. It's
spectacular. Anything else that you're seeing in the conversation before we get wrapped up, Liz?
Just one more comment here. Less representation of middle-aged trans people, like entering 40. But it's hard to pick because there are so many. How lovely that there are so many inspirational stories to choose from now. It's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think it's really exciting across the board that we're also seeing more films that are not just young, beautiful LGBTQ people. When Beginners came out with Christopher Plummer, I remember watching that film and thinking, what an amazing story to tell. And then I bet a lot of people have never even thought about that experience. And it was done so beautifully. I was just happy to see that it was happening. And I think we definitely need to see a lot more age diversity because there's so many different kinds of stories to be told. And I think we often overlook that part of it.
So we've got about 2 minutes left, Jean Marie. I'm sure you have a few comments to wrap us up.
I do have a few comments. I always have something to say, always, but I have no props today. I was trying to figure out how do I get myself discovered in Hollywood with this conversation. I'm just going to say if there's a casting director watching who needs a middle-aged lesbian, you should call Liz. She can cast me or something. Middle-aged lesbian, skin's kind of fallen, but still not an eyesore. I'm available. Got all the time in the world if we can film a movie from here. So a few things. So first of all, I want to thank Jamie and Jamel for making my Thursday a load of fun. We knew we were going to have a good time with this one. So thank you both for that. And thank you for having so much fun with the conversation. The second thing is I want to thank everybody who joined us today. I know we're all feeling really isolated and sometimes feeling really alone and things are difficult. But these are the ways that we stick together. And I'm really glad to see all of your beautiful names and little pictures of faces. And I am so happy to see you and so grateful to you. So my last thing that I will say is this. We're going to do this again next week. We'll figure out the article and post it. So please join us back here. Please invite other people to participate. You can also watch this after the broadcast. But for now, from all of us at PFLAG National, I want to first of all thank you for joining us. I want to thank you for all of the incredible things that you're doing to save lives, because you do that. Remind everybody that there are great resources available at pflag.org and straightforequality.org. And sign off with what I think I want to start signing off with all the time until future notice, which is I want everybody to be safe, to be healthy, and to more than anything else, please be kind to each other and please be kind to yourselves. These are the ways that we're going to get through this. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope we see you again next Thursday. Please join us, and thanks so much. Everybody be safe. We'll see you soon.